The 1970s and 80s gave us a lot of memorable television shows, and having a hit show wasn't easy. Many of the more successful ones had great actors, actresses, writing, and last but not least, cars. Some of the vehicles in those shows became just as famous as those who were starring in them. In this video, we will have a look back at some of the 1970s and 1980s famous television cars. There's no denying that Farrah Fawcett's charming smile and beautiful hair got us to watch Charlie's Angels, but let's not forget about the car that she drove in the show. Farrah played a private investigator who ran around town in a 1976 Ford Mustang Cobra II that was white with blue stripes. The show itself aired on television from 1976 to 1981, but Farrah left the show after just the first season. Tom Selleck became the man that women loved in the hit TV show Magnum P.I., which ran from 1984 to 1990. He played Tom Magnum, who wore short shorts, Hawaiian shirts, and of course the cool sunglasses. Magnum was also well known for riding around in a red Ferrari 308 GTS. If you're going to work security, then why not do it in style? For most of us that watch the show, we could only dream of driving something like that. Henry Winkler played a larger-than-life iconic character in the hit TV show Happy Days. He was known as Arthur Fonzarelli, or better yet, as the Fonz. Hey! Happy Days was on the air from 1974 to 1984. The Fonz initially rode a Harley-Davidson knucklehead bobber in the first season, but because Winkler couldn't ride a motorcycle, it switched. His ride then became a 1949 Triumph Trophy TR5 Scrambler Custom, which they pulled on the set for him. Stingray was an American drama series that ran from 1985 to 1987. It starred Nick Mancuso, who plays a mysterious character named Ray. He drives around in a black 1965 Corvette Stingray in Southern California. Ray has a shadowy past, but he gets people out of trouble in exchange for future favors. It was an action-packed Emmy-winning series that had a relatively short life. The A-Team was an action-adventure series that was on television from 1983 to 1987. It focused on 4 former members of the U.S. Army Special Forces who were working as soldiers of fortune. One of the biggest stars of the show was Mr. T and his iconic mohawk, but that certainly wasn't the only one. This special team made vans look super cool. They drove around in a 1983 GMC Vandura van that was black with a red stripe wrapping around into a spoiler on top. Paul Michael Glaser and David Soul played Southern California police detectives David Starsky and Ken Hutchinson in the popular TV show Starsky and Hutch. It was on television from 1975 to 1979. The detectives were full of swagger, but they shared that swagger with their car. They drove at least 10 1974 to 1976 Ford Grand Torinos that were red with white stripes. Do you remember the car's nickname? They called it the Striped Tomato. In the 1970s, Telly Savalas made bald look cool. He was also known for his love of lollipops and the catchphrase, "Who loves you, baby?" in the hit show Kojak, which aired from 1973 to 1978. Telly played a New York City police detective named Theo Kojak, and he drove a 1974 Buick Century 455. Taxi the Show was on air from 1978 to 1982. This was a series that followed all of the employees of the Sunshine Cab Company in New York. A traditional 1978 checkered taxi cab can be seen driving over the Queensboro Bridge at the opening of each episode. If your family is as big as the Brady Bunch, then you're going to need a big car. The family used a 1970 and later a 1971 Plymouth Satellite station wagon during the years on the air from 1969 to 1974. The car was often seen when Mom Carol and housekeeper Alice returned from grocery shopping. Knight Rider was on the air from 1982 to 1986. It starred David Hasselhoff as the crime-fighting hero Michael Knight. David may have thought he was the biggest star of the show, but it was really the car. They used about 20 cars in total, which were black 1982 to 1984 Pontiac Firebird Trans Ams. In the show, the car was controlled by a computer and known as KIT, which stood for Knight Industries 2000. This car became so popular that when you saw a black Trans Am from those years, you likely referred to it as the KIT car. Vegas was an American crime drama television series that starred Robert Urich as a private detective and was on the air from 1978 to 1982. Urich played Dan Tana, who drives to all of his assignments in a red 1957 Ford Thunderbird convertible. However, the pilot episode featured a 1967 yellow Chevrolet Corvette, which was destroyed in a fire. CHIPS was short for California Highway Patrol, and this show was on the air from 1977 to 1983. It followed two highway patrol officers named Ponch and John, played by Eric Estrada and Larry Wilcox. They were on Kawasaki KZP motorcycles, which is what their real-life counterparts rode. The two actors did a lot of their own riding, but they were also said to have incurred a few injuries on the show. The Waltons was a popular television drama that aired from 1972 to 1981. It followed the life of future writer John Walton Jr., aka John Boy, and his extended family during the 1930s and 1940s in rural Virginia. The family had an old 1929 Ford Model A pickup that the patriarch John Walton often drove. In the 1980s, Miami Vice became a cultural phenomenon when it was on the air from 1984 to 1990. Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas played a couple of undercover police detectives named Sonny Crockett and Ricardo Tubbs. The detectives were all about their style, from their sleek suits to the cars that they drove. Crockett was seen driving a white 1986 Ferrari Testarossa. There's no telling how many kids wanted to be a detective thinking that they could drive one of those cars. James Garner played Jim Rockford in The Rockford Files, which aired from 1974 to 1980. Rockford was a private investigator who was often behind the wheel of his gold Pontiac Firebird. He began in a 1974 model and then switched to the next model year every season except season 6, which premiered in 1979. Rockford kept his 1978 model during that season. If you watch the show, then I'm sure you're familiar with the Rockford signature move. The Jim Rockford's J-turn was helpful in chasing or running from the bad guys. The Partridge Family was on the air from 1970 to 1974. This singing family used a converted school bus, which was a 1955 Chevrolet 6800. It served as their transportation near home and on the concert trail. The bus was also the center point of several plots, like when the skunk wandered onto the bus and left them in a stinky situation. Emergency was a popular fast-paced series devoted to a medical rescue team in Los Angeles, and it was on the air from 1972 to 1977. The show put an early spotlight on paramedics and their role as first responders, which can be credited in helping to popularize the profession. The vehicles used by Station 51 were a Dodge D300, and they were a beast of a truck in their time. The comedy series BJ and the Bear aired from 1979 to 1981. It starred Greg Evigan as BJ, who was joined by his pet chimp, Bear. The show was hoping to capitalize on the CB radio and trucker mania of the time period. It followed BJ, who was a Vietnam vet, as he hits the road in his Kenworth K100 Aerodyne truck and gets caught up with local crimes along the way. Another trucker series that was on the air was Moving On, which was on television from 1974 to 1976. It starred Claude Akins as an old-school truck driver who drove a 1973 and 74 Kenworth W925. The theme song was performed by country music legend Merle Haggard. You may also recognize Claude Akins in BJ and the Bear, where he played a frequent guest as Sheriff Lobo. The Dukes of Hazzard was on television from 1979 to 1985, and it was centered around Bo and Luke Duke. The show popularized the look and term Daisy Dukes, but it also showcased a car that has become iconic in television show history. The Duke boys drove an orange 1969 Dodge Charger that had doors that wouldn't open and a racing number on the side. They were constantly involved in car chases, which led to the show going through hundreds of these cars during its time on television. Many of the vehicles that were used in these television shows have now become a part of television history. As we watched the episodes, we fell in love with the characters and the cars. Most of us will never forget them. What are some of the cars that you remember from television? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching.